There's also been reporting that would suggest that, Donald Trump he's talked to Russian President Vladimir Putin, and Vladimir Putin has signaled a willingness not to move on this issue. So Donald Trump is realizing, and we know that the Ukraine war happened after his administration, he's realizing how complicated this is going to be in terms of negotiating between the two sides. And you have a part of the Republican Party that is very much intent on cutting U.S. aid to Ukraine, but you also have another part of the party that is very pro-Ukraine and anti-Russian influence. So he's going to be getting a lot of messaging, not only from Joe Biden, but also from members of his party on this.
Joe Biden, we're told, is expected to urge Donald Trump not to abandon Ukraine. Well, let's get more on all of this from Julia Manchester, reporter in Washington, D.C. for The Hill. Hello, Julia.
Hello, Carol. Thank you for having me.
Well, we heard about Tom Homan there. Tell us more about his appointment and what that means for these plans for the mass deportation of illegal migrants.
Well, look, it signals that former President Trump is taking a hardline stance on immigration. That's no surprise. We know that Tom Homan was once ICE Director, Immigrations and Custom Enforcement, and he oversaw that zero tolerance policy in terms of deporting and family separations earlier in the last Trump administration. So he is expected to take predictably a very hardline stance. And it's not just Tom Homan who's been appointed that signals this. We know that Stephen Miller, a former Trump aide during the first administration. He's been appointed to be Deputy Chief of Staff of Policy, and we know that he is also a hardliner on immigration. But, back to Tom Homan for a second. He was recently interviewed on CBS News' 60 Minutes, and the interviewer essentially asked him, look, what about these family separations? What if the people you're deporting will be separated from their children or family members who are left here in the U.S.? And Tom Homan essentially said, then we'll deport the families. So he's looking to start out with workplace deportations, going into construction working sites, for example, in different areas of work. And that could have an impact on the U.S. economy because remember, undocumented migrants or people who are here illegally do play a role in this country's economy.
And this prospect of potentially pictures of illegal migrants being rounded up, being detained and so on. I mean, I wonder if there are any qualms in those around Donald Trump about how this could be perceived.
I think there's certainly going to be backlash from the left and immigrant advocacy organizations. We're already starting to see that gearing up. In fact, some of these organizations have made the argument that, look, Tom Homan, when he talks about trafficking, for example, we know that the trafficking of children, for example, has played into the Trump campaigns and transition teams' messaging on being hardline on immigration. They say, look, we are now conflating, or the Trump administration is now conflating those who are being trafficked and those who are doing the trafficking and just looping them all together. So it will certainly get backlash. But look, what the Trump campaign, with the Trump transition team and the administration will say is that Donald Trump won the popular vote. He won all seven swing states. Republicans control Congress or are on track to control the House, control the Senate, and that he has a mandate. That's what they're likely going to argue. And you're going to see the former president or president-elect start to draft up a number of executive orders that he will put into effect on the day he is inaugurated. So they are full steam ahead.
Let me ask you about the appointment of the new U.S. ambassador to the United Nations, Elise Stefanik, a New York congresswoman. Tell us a bit more about her and what that appointment could signal.
Well, she has a very interesting history, Elise Stefanik. She actually was elected. She was at the time of her election, she was the youngest member of Congress, and she was considered a moderate Republican at the time. She represents a district in upstate New York, not far from the Canadian border. And when you saw the rise of Trump, sort of saw her start to fall in that direction, fall towards Trump and become this Trump Republican. And she has certainly risen through the ranks to becoming House Republican Conference Chair. So Elise Stefanik certainly, a rising star in Republican politics, but she's also been a very vocal critic of the pro-Palestine movement here in the U.S. and a critic of how universities handle anti-Semitism on their campuses. There was a viral moment about 11 months ago during during a House education committee hearing, where she had a number of the Ivy League schools presidents in front of her, and she asked them, whether calling for the genocide of the Jewish people somehow is a violation of their school's codes of conduct. And none of these presidents could really answer the question. So it earned her praise not only from Republicans, but also from a number of Democrats. She has since addressed the Knesset in Israel earlier this year, and she was on the short list to be the president-elect's vice presidential candidate. So she's certainly been loyal to Donald Trump. We know that that's something he, prioritizes in picking these positions, but also, her entering the United Nations, she's going to take a hardline stance on this issue of Israel and U.S. support of Israel. So it could certainly shake things up.
Yeah, and certainly what we're seeing is a whole series of people who are all seen as long-standing loyalists to Donald Trump. Let me ask you about one other issue. The Times tonight is reporting that when Joe Biden meets Donald Trump at the Oval Office on Wednesday, Joe Biden's going to urge Donald Trump not to abandon Ukraine once he enters the White House. Do you think Donald Trump's going to be in a mood to listen to that?
I think Donald Trump is most gracious when he has won. And I think he will, at least in front of the cameras, be on his best behavior. But look, I think there's also been reporting that would suggest that, Donald Trump he's talked to Russian President Vladimir Putin, and Vladimir Putin has signaled a willingness not to move on this issue. So Donald Trump is realizing, and we know that the Ukraine war happened after his administration, he's realizing how complicated this is going to be in terms of negotiating between the two sides. And you have a part of the Republican Party that is very much intent on cutting U.S. aid to Ukraine, but you also have another part of the party that is very pro-Ukraine and anti-Russian influence. So he's going to be getting a lot of messaging, not only from Joe Biden, but also from members of his party on this.
And just finally, one other issue. Throughout his election campaign, Donald Trump was talking about drill, baby, drill. Obviously, he's not at the COP climate summit. Biden's envoy is there. Is there this sense in which, just as he did when he was last in office, Donald Trump could be prepared to rip up anything that is actually agreed at this latest COP summit in Baku?
I would not rule it out. In fact, just like he did during his first administration, he pulled the U.S. out of the Paris Climate Accords. He's, expected to do that once again. He is taking a much more pro non-renewable energy stance. We've seen, Lee Zeldin talk about the importance of non-renewable energy and not necessarily gutting those industries, but also kind of talk about the importance of energy industry across the board. But I think you're going to see Donald Trump really want to focus on that non-renewable energy, and a lot of that just simply conflicts with where a lot of these world leaders are.
Julia Manchester, reporter at The Hill in Washington, D.C. Great to talk to you. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Carol.